Behind every famous name, behind every culture, behind every nation, there lies a hidden story. A story of struggle, of survival, of dreams, and of hope. These are not just stories from the past. They are voices that still echo today, forgotten, silenced, or misunderstood. Through every journey we share, you will discover not only the facts, but also the emotions, the joy, the pain, and the resilience of the human spirit. Because history is not made of dates and events alone. It is made of people, real people, whose hidden lives shape the world we know today. And as we explore these untold stories together, may they remind us of one truth, that no matter how dark the journey, there is always a light, hope. Welcome to Hidden Lives YouTube channel, a place where knowledge meets emotion and where hidden lives find their voice. In the golden glow of Hollywood's history, one name still shines brighter than most: Marilyn Monroe. To the world, she was the ultimate symbol of beauty, glamour, and desire. Her smile lit up cinema screens, her image graced magazine covers, and her presence captivated generations. But behind the dazzling lights, behind the carefully crafted image of a star, was a fragile soul named Norma Jeane, whose life began in pain, loneliness, and uncertainty. This is not just the story of Marilyn Monroe, the icon. This is the story of Norma Jeane Mortensen, a girl born into chaos, abandoned by her father, and raised in the shadows of her mother's mental illness. It is a story of a child shuffled from one home to another, of a girl who spent nights wondering if she would ever truly belong. Before she became Hollywood's brightest star, she was just another forgotten child in the system. Yet, it is within that painful beginning that her resilience was born. Marilyn's life reminds us that even in the harshest soil, beauty can grow. That even in the coldest night, a spark of hope can endure. To understand the legend of Marilyn Monroe, we must first understand the child who longed for love, the teenager who dreamed of stability, and the young woman who dared to reinvent herself against all odds. In this documentary, we will journey beyond the iconic image, past the white dress fluttering over a subway grate, past the glamorous photo shoots, past the scandal and fame. We will return to the beginning, to the little girl named Norma Jeane, born in 1926 in Los Angeles, whose earliest memories were not of comfort, but of instability and abandonment. To the orphanages and foster homes where she learned too early what it meant to survive without love. And yet, despite this painful past, her story is not only one of tragedy, it is also one of triumph, of transformation, and of enduring legacy. Because Marilyn Monroe was not just a star to be admired, she was a survivor, a woman who rose from abandonment to become a timeless cultural icon. Her journey forces us to ask, how does a forgotten child become the most famous woman in the world? And at what cost? Join us as we uncover Marilyn Monroe's hidden childhood, the tragedy that shaped her, and the resilience that defined her. Section 2. Childhood and Family Background. Marilyn Monroe's journey did not begin beneath the dazzling lights of Hollywood, but in a modest hospital room in Los Angeles on June 1st, 1926. She entered the world as Norma Jeane Mortensen, a name that few would ever remember, but a child whose face would one day be known everywhere. Her birth, however, carried with it no promise of stability. From the very first breath, life placed her on uncertain ground. Her mother, Gladys Pearl, worked at a film laboratory, splicing together fragments of reels for Hollywood studios. On the surface, it seemed a glamorous connection to the movie industry, but the reality was far from glittering. Gladys was fragile, burdened by financial troubles and haunted by mental health struggles. She loved her daughter deeply, but love alone could not provide the stability a child needed. Her father's identity was uncertain. Some claimed he was a co-worker of Gladys. Others suggested different men. For Norma Jeane, the absence of a father was not only a fact of her childhood, but a wound that would linger in her heart throughout her life. She grew up never knowing who he was, never receiving the assurance of a father's protection. When Gladys's struggles grew overwhelming, little Norma Jeane was placed into foster care. By the tender age of 7, she had already lived in multiple homes, passed from one family to another like a guest who never quite belonged. Each move left her with a deeper longing, the yearning for a place where she would not be sent away, where she would finally be home. The orphanage years were perhaps the loneliest. Inside the high walls, she watched as other children were visited by mothers and fathers who came bearing gifts and warm embraces. Norma Jeane waited, sometimes by the door, sometimes by the window, her heart beating with hope. But too often, the hours passed and no one came for her. The emptiness of those waiting rooms etched itself into her soul. In some foster homes, kindness greeted her. In others, cruelty left scars that could not be seen but were deeply felt. She experienced neglect and even abuse, experiences far too heavy for a child to carry. And yet, within her young heart, a stubborn resilience began to form, a determination to survive no matter how harsh the world seemed. Norma Jeane found escape in imagination. She would lose herself in the pages of magazines, gazing at the polished faces of Hollywood stars. At the movies, she studied every smile, every graceful gesture of the women on screen. To her, cinema was not only a dream, it was a lifeline, a promise that somewhere beyond her pain, there might be beauty, recognition, and love. Her childhood, however, was not simply a tale of sadness. Within the struggle, she discovered qualities that would define her later life. She learned to adapt quickly to new environments, to read people's emotions, to survive by pleasing others. These skills, born of hardship, would one day make her captivating on screen, yet they also carried the weight of the little girl who never truly felt safe. Norma Jeane longed for stability, for a family that would not vanish when things grew difficult. She dreamed of a mother who was well, a father who would appear, a home where doors did not close behind her. These dreams, fragile as they were, kept her spirit alive. They gave her something to hold on to as the world around her shifted like sand. Her childhood was not a fairy tale. It was a battle, a test of endurance, and a quest for belonging. Every heartbreak, every unanswered question, every lonely night etched itself into her identity. And yet, within the shadows of abandonment, the seeds of her future were planted: resilience, yearning, and an unquenchable hunger for love. Section 3. Teenage Years and Early Escape. As Norma Jeane grew into her teenage years, the instability of her childhood followed her like a shadow. She was barely 16 when she faced a crossroads that no young girl should ever have to face. The foster system, weary of finding homes for her, planned to send her once again into an uncertain future. To escape another transfer, she was offered what seemed like the only option available: marriage. The foster system, weary of finding homes for her, planned to send her once again into an uncertain future. To escape another transfer, she was offered what seemed like the only option available: marriage. In 1942, at the tender age of 16, she married James Dougherty, a neighbor's son. To the outside world, it looked like a simple union, a girl finding stability in a husband's home. But inside, Norma Jeane was still just a child, unprepared for the responsibilities of marriage. She longed not for romance, but for safety, a place where she would not be abandoned once more. James was older, steady, and kind, but their marriage was not built on passion. It was born of necessity. While he went to work, Norma Jeane tried to adapt to the role of a housewife. She cooked, cleaned, and played the part expected of her, but deep inside, a restless spirit stirred. The world around her was changing. The Second World War had broken out, and like countless women across America, Norma Jeane joined the workforce when men were sent overseas. She found herself in a munitions factory, working with machines, her face and hands marked by grease and labor. Yet even in that unlikely setting, fate was quietly preparing to alter the course of her life. In 1944, while working at the factory, a military photographer arrived to capture images of women supporting the war effort. Among the rows of workers, one young woman stood out, her smile radiant, her presence unforgettable. That woman was Norma Jeane. The photographs captured her natural charm, her ability to shine, even in the most ordinary surroundings. Those images would become her first step toward Hollywood. When the photographs reached modeling agencies, doors began to open. Norma Jeane was offered small modeling jobs, posing for magazines and advertisements. For the first time, she tasted independence. She earned her own money, stood in front of cameras, and began to feel the spark of recognition. It was intoxicating, the idea that she could be seen, admired, and remembered. But her marriage began to crumble under the weight of change. James wanted a traditional wife, someone content to stay at home. Norma Jeane, however, was awakening to a different destiny. She wanted freedom. She wanted to be more than a housewife. She wanted to be someone. The gap between them widened until, in 1946, their marriage ended in divorce. It was a painful ending, but also a liberation. Norma Jeane was now free to pursue the faint but growing call of Hollywood. She had no guarantee of success, no safety net to fall back on. All she carried with her were her photographs, her determination, and a burning need to prove that she was more than the abandoned child of her past. At just 20 years old, Norma Jeane stood at the edge of transformation. She was leaving behind the role of a forgotten child and an unhappy wife and stepping into the unknown world of fame. Ahead lay reinvention, opportunity, and heartbreak. But in this moment, she was simply a young woman, determined to write a new story for herself. Section 4. The birth of Marilyn Monroe. Hollywood in the late 1940s was a world of dazzling lights, endless ambition, and carefully crafted illusions. It was a place where dreams could be made overnight, but also broken just as quickly. Into this glittering but unforgiving world stepped Norma Jeane, a young woman who had endured a childhood filled with instability and longing. She arrived carrying not only hope, but also the quiet determination to reinvent herself. In 1946, she signed her very first film contract with 20th Century Fox. It was a modest beginning, but in her heart, it meant a doorway into a new life. The studio, however, believed that to succeed, she needed more than just talent. She needed a new identity. Norma Jeane Mortensen did not sound like the name of a future legend. It was too ordinary, too forgettable, and so began the discussions that would change her forever. The studio chose the first name Marilyn, inspired by the stage actress Marilyn Miller. For her last name, they suggested Monroe, her mother's maiden name. And with that decision, Norma Jeane ceased to exist, at least in the eyes of Hollywood. Marilyn Monroe was born, but it was more than just a name change. It was the construction of an entirely new persona, one that the world would soon adore. The transformation went deeper than a signature on paper. Her hair was bleached a shimmering blonde. Her makeup was redesigned to emphasize glamour, and her wardrobe was tailored to fit the fantasy of a rising star. She was trained to pose, to walk with confidence, to smile in ways that captured attention. Every gesture, every look was carefully rehearsed. Hollywood was not just making a star, it was creating a symbol. But Marilyn's early years in the studio were far from glamorous. Her first roles were small, often uncredited parts in forgettable films. She was just another hopeful face in a city overflowing with dreamers. Yet Marilyn had something unique and instinctive understanding of the camera. Even in the smallest roles, she managed to make audiences notice her. A tilt of her head, a playful glance, a smile that felt both innocent and alluring, she knew how to turn seconds into memories. Still, she struggled to be taken seriously. Critics dismissed her as another pretty blonde, destined to be forgotten. But Marilyn refused to fade into the background. She began studying acting more intensely, guided by mentors like Natasha Lytis. She delved into method acting, trying to infuse her performances with emotional depth. Her persistence began to pay off. By 1950, her brief roles in The Asphalt Jungle and All About Eve drew attention. Critics noted her startling screen presence. At last, Hollywood was beginning to believe in Marilyn Monroe. But the price of recognition was heavy. Studio contracts were strict and exploitative. Marilyn was underpaid, overworked, and constantly told how to behave, what to wear, even how to speak. Her image was no longer her own, it belonged to Hollywood. And yet, the transformation was undeniable. The world was beginning to see Marilyn Monroe not just as another actress, but as a rising icon of beauty, glamour, and desire. Behind the dazzling image, Norma Jeane still lived, longing to be understood. But to the public, a legend was being born. Section 5. Rise to fame and becoming a Hollywood icon. By the early 1950s, Marilyn Monroe was no longer just another hopeful actress. She was becoming a household name, a face that everyone recognized, a presence that seemed to leap out of the silver screen and enter the hearts of audiences across America. Hollywood studios quickly realized that Marilyn had something rare, a combination of vulnerability and radiance, innocence and sensuality that made people unable to look away. She was not just acting, she was embodying a fantasy that audiences wanted to believe in. Her roles grew bigger and brighter. In Niagara, 1953, she became the very embodiment of desire, a femme fatale whose image in a tight-fitting dress, walking against the roar of a waterfall, became unforgettable. The studio marketed her as the blonde bombshell, and the public responded with fascination. Soon after came Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, where Marilyn, alongside Jane Russell, lit up the screen with her comedic timing, her musical performance, and her now iconic number, Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend. The film's success was staggering. Marilyn was no longer just an actress, she was a phenomenon. Magazine covers, movie posters, and advertisements all bore her image. She represented a new kind of femininity, playful yet powerful, glamorous yet approachable. For audiences, Marilyn was more than entertainment. She was a symbol of hope after the austerity of the war years, a vision of beauty and possibility in a rapidly changing America. To see Marilyn on screen was to escape into a world where glamour and joy still existed. But with fame came pressures that would test her spirit. She was expected to appear flawless at all times, perfect smile, perfect posture, perfect words for every interview. The studios controlled her schedule, sending her from film sets to photo shoots to endless publicity events. Behind the flashbulbs and applause, Marilyn felt a deep conflict. She longed to be respected as a serious actress, to be valued for her talent, not only her beauty. But the system was designed to keep her in the role of the dream girl, the fantasy figure that sold tickets. Still, Marilyn continued to rise. In How to Marry a Millionaire, 1953, and The 7-Year Itch, 1955, she cemented her place as Hollywood's brightest star. The scene of her white dress billowing above a subway grate became one of the most iconic images in film history. She was not just performing roles, she was shaping culture itself. Her look, her style, her voice, even her laughter became imitated by millions. Marilyn Monroe was no longer just a person. She was an idea, a legend in the making. But behind the dazzling surface, the cracks were beginning to show. Marilyn struggled with stage fright, insecurity, and the ever-present fear of being abandoned echoes of her troubled childhood. She masked these feelings with laughter, with beauty, with charm, but inside she carried a loneliness that fame could not erase. Her rise to fame was dazzling, but it also set the stage for the struggles that would follow. Marilyn Monroe was becoming the world's brightest star, but like every star, the brighter she shone, the more fragile she became. Section 6. The Height of Fame and the Fragile Soul. Films like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and How to Marry a Millionaire did more than entertain. They cemented Marilyn as the quintessential blonde bombshell. Her walk, her voice, her laughter, all carefully crafted yet somehow irresistibly genuine, captured the fantasy of millions. She was no longer just acting. She was becoming a cultural phenomenon. Yet behind the dazzling performances was a woman deeply insecure, haunted by memories of abandonment and rejection. Success could not silence the voice inside her that whispered she was still unworthy, still fragile, still the little girl searching for love. Fame amplified her beauty, but it also magnified her loneliness. Hollywood celebrated her image, but rarely her talent. Directors often typecast her as the seductive blonde, ignoring her intelligence and her determination to be taken seriously as an actress. Marilyn longed to prove she was more than a body, more than a smile, that she possessed depth, complexity, and artistry. Her marriages reflected the same tension. With baseball legend Joe DiMaggio, the world saw the perfect couple, yet behind closed doors, jealousy and misunderstanding consumed their love. Later, with playwright Arthur Miller, Marilyn hoped for intellectual companionship, but even that bond could not heal the wounds of her soul. As the cameras flashed, Marilyn gave the world her brightest smile, but in private, she battled anxiety, sleepless nights, and a dependence on pills that dulled her pain. The more the public adored her, the more she feared they would discover the truth, that she was not the goddess they imagined, but a fragile human being desperate to be loved. By the mid-1950s, Marilyn Monroe was the most famous woman in the world. Presidents knew her name, soldiers carried her photographs, and ordinary people dreamed of meeting her. Yet for Marilyn, fame was a paradox. It gave her everything she once thought she wanted, while taking away the peace and security she had always needed. Her life became a performance, not just on screen, but every moment in public. The world adored Marilyn Monroe, but few truly knew Norma Jeane, the woman behind the legend. That duality, the dazzling icon and the wounded soul, would define the rest of her short, brilliant, and tragic journey. Section 7. The Road to Collapse and Tragedy. By the early 1960s, Marilyn Monroe's life had become a whirlwind of glamour on the outside and turmoil on the inside. To the world, she was still the radiant star, the woman who could light up the silver screen with a single smile. But behind the glittering curtain, her struggles with mental health, her dependency on barbiturates, and her desperate need for love were consuming her spirit. Film studios began to see her as unreliable. Her lateness to sets, her difficulty remembering lines, and her sudden emotional breakdowns made headlines as much as her performances. Yet what many failed to understand was that these were not signs of arrogance or carelessness. They were symptoms of a woman carrying the unbearable weight of her past traumas. Her marriage to Arthur Miller had ended in heartbreak, leaving her once again with a gnawing sense of abandonment. She surrounded herself with friends and lovers, but the loneliness never left. Even at parties filled with music and laughter, Marilyn often sat apart, her eyes distant, her smile faint, as though she were watching the joy of others from behind a glass wall. The public adored her, but the more they adored Marilyn Monroe, the less she felt seen as Norma Jeane. She longed for authenticity, for someone to look past the legend and love the flawed, fragile woman within. Instead, she became a symbol, beautiful, untouchable, yet tragically isolated. Her professional life suffered as well. The highly publicized production troubles on Something's Got to Give in 1962 portrayed her as unstable and unprofessional. But behind the gossip columns was a deeper truth. Marilyn was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, trapped in a cycle of dependence on pills to sleep, pills to wake, pills to perform. And yet, in the middle of this storm, there were still flashes of brilliance. Her famous performance of "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" in May 1962 showed the world that she remained an icon of allure and charisma. But even that moment, so glamorous on the outside, carried with it whispers of scandal and questions about her private life that she could never escape. Those who knew her best spoke of her vulnerability, her tendency to break into tears, her fear of being unloved, her constant battle to hold on to a sense of worth. She sought therapy, she read literature, she even turned to psychoanalysis, all in a desperate attempt to find herself amidst the chaos. But the peace she longed for remained out of reach. On August 5, 1962, the world awoke to this shocking news. Marilyn Monroe had been found dead in her Los Angeles home. She was just 36 years old. The official cause was listed as acute barbiturate poisoning, a probable suicide. Yet her death sparked endless speculation, conspiracy theories, and debates that continue to this day. Some believed she was silenced because she knew too much, others that she had been abandoned by those who should have cared for her. But beyond the rumors, one undeniable truth remained. Marilyn Monroe, the brightest star of her generation, had burned out far too soon. Her funeral was a private affair, attended by only a handful of friends. Joe DiMaggio, who never stopped loving her, arranged the service and sent roses to her grave every week for 20 years. It was a gesture of devotion that outlived the Hollywood glamour and reminded the world that behind the icon was a woman who had always longed to be loved. Her death marked the end of an era, but her legend only grew stronger. For many, she became the eternal symbol of beauty and tragedy, a reminder of how fragile even the brightest stars can be. Marilyn Monroe's story was not just about fame and glamour. It was about the human cost of a life lived in the spotlight. And so, the girl who once wandered through orphanages, who never knew the warmth of a stable home, left this world as one of the most famous women who ever lived. Yet her story is not just one of tragedy. It is also a lesson about resilience, about the longing for love, and about the humanity that lies beneath the surface of even the brightest legends. Closing. As the final curtain falls on the life of Marilyn Monroe, we are reminded that her story was not only one of fame, beauty, and tragedy, but also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the longing for love, and to the eternal search for identity in a world that often sees only the surface. Marilyn's journey shows us that behind every glamorous smile, there may lie unseen battles, and behind every spotlight, shadows that no one dares to face. Yet within those struggles lives a universal truth that even in brokenness, there is beauty, and in vulnerability, there is strength. Her legacy is not confined to the silver screen. It lives on in every dreamer who dares to rise above circumstances, in every soul who fights to be seen for who they truly are, and in every heart that chooses love over fear. Perhaps Marilyn Monroe's greatest gift to us is the reminder that our imperfections do not diminish our worth, that our struggles do not define our destiny, and that within each of us lies the possibility of light, hope, and renewal. And so, as we remember her not only as an icon, but as a woman fragile yet fierce, broken yet beautiful. We are called to embrace our own humanity, to live authentically, and to shine in our own unique way. For in the end, Marilyn Monroe's story whispers a timeless truth that even in our darkest hours, hope can rise, love can heal, and the human spirit can endure beyond the boundaries of time. If this story moved you, I invite you to subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories like this. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Your feelings matter, and your voice deserves to be heard.